But I'd like to obviously invite Andrew now to say a few words, and then we'll move through the rest of the schedule.
Well, thank you, James. What I want to talk about really is one of the things that Jan touched on at the end, which is the threat that employers decide that, especially in a post-COVID world, that this is an opportunity where they can enhance productivity, but at the same time probably manage to drive down wages. So I think there is a concern generally is how do we get back to full employment? How do we get back to working in a comparatively normal way? And one of the challenges, and it obviously impacts other countries rather than New Zealand, is that even when you are coming back to work, you've got to think about issues around how you have social distancing at work, how you actually operate in an environment where in fact you can't necessarily have everybody working cheek by jowl the way they would have done prior to COVID-19. Now, one of the options, of course, is that if you start to consider issues around a 4-day week, you have an opportunity that you could say, well, look, we can have some of the staff working, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, some working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And also by the time you've done that, you're actually lowering the basic levels of density within a building. And that means you can actually get yourself back probably to a form of working that is in essence getting back to normal productivity. You can also with that possibly look to extend hours, the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. And that in turn means that you can probably, and one of the things that we discovered when we initiated the 4-day week of Perpetual Guardian, we found that by actually allowing people to work flexible hours, we were actually able to deliver, better service to our customers because we were able to work longer hours, more at the beginning of the day, more at the end of the day. But I think the big policy question that we face, and I'm seeing it across industry after industry here in New Zealand, is the fact that the full impact of COVID-19 in terms of retaining jobs is only just being felt. Now, to put that in context, if you look across the New Zealand workforce currently, and you make allowances for about 300,000 people who are currently working directly for the government, broadly all but 200,000 people are currently on some form of job support. And that's out of a total workforce of about 2.7 million. Now, that is not going to be unique to New Zealand. That's going to be something that we're going to see across the whole of the world. So inevitably, a lot of business leaders are starting to think about this issue of maybe trying to retain jobs by cutting the amount of time in the office, dropping down to a 4-day week, but at the same time, taking pay down to 80%. And this is an issue that I know lots and lots of organizations here are actually looking at. Now, the challenge is what we don't want, as Jan mentioned, we don't want this to become the norm. And indeed, there are some countries, and I think Margaret may confirm that, but as I understand it, in Ireland post the GFC, there was some reduction in working week. There was matched by a reduction in wages. And then when the working week went back to 5 days, wages didn't shift back up in certain firms. So the proposal that we are pushing to certainly the government here in New Zealand, but also to employers and union bodies, is to look at a variant of the German Kurzarbeit. Kurzarbeit was a version of the government providing certain support to businesses during the GFC. And in essence, what it was that the government stepped in on the 5th day and provided a range of support, about 60 to 67% of wages, for employees who were being dropped back to a 4-day week with 4 days of pay. Now, our proposal is that actually that some form of that is adopted. But businesses take a view that says, look, we are accepting the fact that we may have to do this in order to preserve jobs in the short term, but we're going to make a firm binding commitment that within a period, and that could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, depending on the circumstance, that we will get back to full levels of pay. But part of what we're doing here is that we are saying that we will, in the intervening period, be looking to sort out the productivity issues that underpin the 4-day week. In other words, if we haven't done the trial work that those of us who have moved to 4-day week have done prior to initiating it, we will do that as part of this project. The view being to get productivity up to the 5-day productivity. Now, once we have achieved full 5-day productivity, and on the basis that the economic conditions are such that the business is now, back to normal, at that point, we'll have salaries back at the 5-day, but we will retain the 4-day week. Now, I think this is a pattern that, frankly, company after company is going to have to start to think about. And I also think, again, using Jan's example of top down, this is where governments can step in with models like the Kaiserweise to then say, what we're going to do is we are going to help fund retraining. Now, again, country after country is talking about increasing funding for apprenticeships. They're talking about increased funding for training. Now, that's fine. But the problem is, if you have an industry that has actually ceased to exist, and again, I will use New Zealand as a case in point, with completely frozen borders, international tourism into the country has ceased to exist. There is a whole industry that basically, for the time being, is in hibernation. It's no good actually upskilling and retraining a workforce in tourism, for tourism, if in fact there is no tourism. So that's where we've got to start to think about being more creative, to say that in some industries, that will actually be about structural change, and that will be about moving people, giving them the time to be retrained, upskilled, so that they can move out of that industry into another industry. Now, the key point here is none of this is a silver bullet. None of this is a perfect solution. But I think that the 4-day week, as part of a strategy being used by companies and governments, can be something that can assist the recovery, can assist the repositioning of the workforce. And then, bizarrely, because it does create more free time, because it does create more wellness, that actually then there is a possibility that it itself will actually stimulate more economic activity. That's all I wanted to say, James.
And thank you for that, Andrew. So a couple of questions have come through, and I'll start with maybe a couple of easy ones, if I may. So when you were going through the pilot, was it people had to take Monday off, or did they have to take Friday off? Was it set in stone, or how did that work?
The pilot was a little bit more prescriptive than we ended up at. So the pilot, basically, we ran it on the basis of you could pick a day. So it wasn't always a fixed day. We have retail outlets. We couldn't therefore shut the business. But we did say to people, look, you can pick a full day. What it's morphed into is this 100-80-100. And what that basically says is we're trying to rebalance work time so that it's 80% of the working week, the normal working week. Now that means that you can take a day, you could take 2 half days, you can come in late, you can go home early. You could work 5 days a week and work compressed hours or asymmetrical hours. We don't mind. All of that is just the only real rule we have is that the team has to be able to deliver on its productivity and customer service targets.
I think the thing that I really like, and you've mentioned it before, is the fact that actually what you've really done actually is given ownership back to the business. You know, they're in charge of their own destiny in effect, that, you know, as long as the parameters around productivity are actually met, you know, whether you want to come in late, whether you want to leave early, whether you want to take Monday or Friday. And I really like that. And it's, I think it's a challenge, and we've spoke about this before, that some business leaders actually get a little bit mindful of giving that trust to the employee. And that's a really interesting word, trust, when we do talk about the productivity nature of what obviously you and Charlotte have actually achieved. And I really like the fact that unfortunately, it's taken a little bit of a global pandemic to put this really firmly on the table. And we've seen obviously the news in the last couple of weeks with our own Prime Minister obviously talking about this type of stuff. But the simple fact is that we need to challenge the norm. You know, this old traditional way of doing the Monday to Friday, the 9 to 5, the inputs are monitored and not the output. And I think what you've done is you've brought it to everybody's attention that the simple fact is that there is just a better way to do it. And I really like that. You know, the thing is, what this actually now gives us is the opportunity to think about economic reform, redeployment of people that unfortunately through this pandemic will lose or have lost their jobs, and then the incorporation of technology that actually will actually help our economy thrive, as long as we embrace it and we think about how we actually drive that forward.